Hi, my name is Will Weeder. I'm at the NIWAT LTER, and I'm representing a soil organic matter synthesis working group that I'm heading up with Kate Loida. And the central question of our working group is that over the last 20 years, there's been all these competing hypotheses in the literature that emphasize different factors that are responsible for soil organic matter stabilization. So some hypotheses really emphasize the chemical recalcitrance of SOM. Others emphasize kind of these microbial and mineral interactions of SOM stabilization. And together they've generated this kind of flurry of alternative representations in soil biogeochemical models. And so part of the purpose of our working group is to synthesize some of the multi-scale data, multi-site data that's represented across LTER sites, which really presents some exciting opportunities to help evaluate and refine some of the theories, assumptions, and parameters that go into models. And then start to think about some alternative model structures and ultimately being able to advance ecosystem science. So some of the kind of particular questions that we're looking at in the working group are what are the role of climate, vegetation, and soil minerals in governing SOM formation and vulnerability. We're interested in thinking about what's the relationship between litter quality and SOM stabilization, and then thinking about some appropriate proxies that we can think about for how physicochemical stabilization of SOM occurs. We're also trying to think about, one of the unique parts of what LTER does is there's this great baseline data from all the sites, but then there's a lot of global change experiments and manipulations that have gone on at LTER sites. And so what are the factors that potentially mediate SOM response to these experimental manipulations and perturbations? And then finally, we'd like to think about ways that we can really harmonize how researchers are sampling and analyzing their soils data. So to do this, we have a pretty big working group, especially compared to a lot of the other NCO synthesis groups. Altogether, there's 33 participants, and 22 of those were able to come to a meeting this last March. There's a really nice spread of empiricists, folks that are measuring SOM chemistry and characteristics, a good group of modelers, and then some data managers that have been really key to the success of our group so far. There's a good age distribution from graduate students up to established senior scientists. And then the other unique part of our working group is that we intentionally went beyond the LTER because we recognized that the critical zone observatory and NEON data both provided some unique opportunities to extend NSF research beyond LTER. So at our meeting, so far our working group has sought to identify data sets that we'll be using to synthesize, and then coming up with ways to homogenize those really diverse data sets, both in terms of their naming conventions, the units they use, the things that they're measuring, and synthesize those observations into a harmonized framework. Down the road, we're coming up with some of the building blocks for how we can ingest these data to parameterize and evaluate models. And then we've had some kind of high-level discussions about how we want to publish our data and analyses. So one of the key findings that we've had so far in our working group is that data management is really, really key. And I can't emphasize enough how important Stephen Earle and Derek Pearson have been in kind of moving this along, and just kind of to give them both a shout out. Stephen is the data manager for CAP, and by no means, I think, a soil organic matter expert, but he's incredible with how he's helped our group think about data management. And then Derek's a graduate student working with Kate at OSU, and both of them are here. And so I'd encourage you all to talk to them at ASM about the process that they've really helped initiate. And a huge task for any synthesis activity is taking messy data that's collected in different formats with different units and different naming conventions and moving it to something that's nicely organized with consistent units and common data fields, field names. And so the ways that Stephen and Derek have really helped move our working group along have been really critical to the success of the project. Part of the reason for doing that is that there's all these different stages of model development that we're using data for. And so data can be used to parameterize models, or also for inputs to models for the kind of background boundary conditions for what a model sees. The data can also then be used to validate and evaluate the model output. And ultimately, what we're really trying to do is test some of the underlying structures and assumptions that are in models. But then we're also expecting there to be this kickback that by doing this kind of careful data model integration, some of the data will come back out, or some of the models will be able to identify some data gaps that can hopefully guide future research needs. And so towards that end, some of the products and outcomes that we have so far and that we're still working on, the big one that I'm really excited about is a data homogenization and quality control package that's on GitHub and available for R. That's something that Stephen and Darren have been working on quite a bit, and we'll be talking about at a workshop during the ASM. We're also working on a white paper to discuss best practices for soil measurements. Kate Lloyd is heading that up, and also will be a topic of conversation at the ASM. And then kind of the big product that we're working on ultimately is this large database that has data from all the terrestrial LTER sites, as well as the Critical Zone Observatory and DIRT network, which is the detritus input and removal treatments, as well as NEON sites. All that data we're hoping to pull into one or several model development papers. And then down the road, we see this data synthesis as providing kind of identifying data gaps that could be used for future proposals, whether that's to eager or macro systems, with kind of next steps of where we see the network being able to continue providing leadership in terms of soil organic matter research. So with that, I hope you all have a good meeting.
Now.